Excellent. Hey, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom, certified financial planner, helping those 5 to 10 years from retirement have more wisdom and less worry. Today is Retirement Readiness Thursday. We are going to discuss two snowbirds, recently retired Whitney and Gerald. They are, I believe, they're 66 and 65. They want to spend their summers in New York and they want to spend their winters here in Florida, and they want to make sure that they're not paying double taxes or that they're not having a bunch of Medicare headaches. So, for anyone that's been thinking about having two residencies, like two states, a snowbird type of environment, this will be the live for you. And so, what we'll do is I will go ahead and I will start sharing the case study with you. All right. So what we'll do is let's first go through the case study so I can get you familiar. I will show you some of the things that they were looking to have accomplished, and we'll be able to go from there. So first and foremost, you can see that we have a 73% probability of success, and the goal is to really be over 70. And the reason we normally say that is because we run what's called Monte Carlo simulations, very fancy way of saying that we run 1,000 different scenarios. And we ideally would like to see that about 70% plus we're in the green, that we make it to the end of retirement with money. And then I'll go through and I'll show you some of the tests that we'll do. There's some stress testing. It could be everything from, hey, what if my returns are lower? What if my healthcare expenses are higher, or inflation's higher, or they cut Social Security or the stock return? Like there's so many different variables that we really all do have to think about, not stress about, but we want to think about when we're planning for retirement. And then when you're really talking about planning for really any of that stuff, we really want to be able to give ourselves the highest probability of success. So with this particular plan, the amount of risk protection that was built into it, 73%, is actually a really good number. And I'll show you some of the things that we baked into that cake. They did a good job of not having really much debt. Their homes were free and clear. They were able to pay both of them all. No. Actually, they had 5 years left on the Florida condo. So they have 5 years left on the Florida condo. The New York home was free and clear. And when we talk about you being double taxed with residency, especially when you're talking about some of those states, man, some of those states are really tough. And so New York and California are kind of the two well-known states where they make it very difficult for you to not be considered a resident of that state. And so for them in New York, there's a couple things. So New York wants you to show like they want the burden on you to prove that you do not just live in New York. And in New York's defense, what they would say is, hey, we have a lot of social programs that are provided to the citizens of New York. That's part of the reason that they are taxed the way that they are. And so if you are living in New York using the healthcare system, using the subway system, you're just using all of the systems that people who live there are paying more in taxes to provide, then that would be a disservice, right? So they're like, hey, if you're here a certain amount of time, then it's almost the equivalent of you living in New York. And so we want you to prove that you are not a resident here. And so for New York, the number is you can't be there more than 183 days in a given year. Any of the states, you just want to kind of look that up. They'll tell you when they consider you a resident, whether or not you then have to pay taxes. And so in New York, if you're there more than 183 days, they would start really looking at you cross-eyed, and they would consider all of your income. And so it's like a weird little pullback thing. So New York, they're a global enterprise where literally everyone in the whole world does business in New York. And so they want to be able to collect tax revenue from those people. So if you're doing business in New York over 183 days in a year, if you have income coming from New York, they'll also tax that, even if you're not like a resident. So they go through a lot of these different processes. That means the burden's on you to keep track of all of this information to prove that you were not there more than 183 days, which is like 10 months, to prove that you have residency in your other state. So in Florida, think of it almost like back in the day, if you're going to college and you wanted to get in-state tuition, you would have like a utility bill. You would have maybe a mortgage or a rent. You would have like a license. You would do these little things to prove that you're a resident of the state, so that way you can have in-state tuition. And normally if you're there for like a year, then you get those savings. And it's sort of like that when you're trying to prove that you don't live in New York, and that it's just kind of like a little vacation home. You're not there more than 183 days. You have a Florida license, you have Florida mortgage, you have a Florida utility bill. And then maybe even your doctor is in Florida. They do look at even those small things. So it can be something where if you're not very intentional with it, then New York is they're going to tax you as if you live there. And then Florida will tax you as well. And I mean, we don't have a state tax in Florida, but it is the idea that I don't want to be double taxed. I don't want to give Uncle Sam any more than I have to. And so the burden tends to be on you for that. And so when you're looking at the 83%, all we're basically saying is when you run the numbers, we're saying that there is, as far as living to 90, that there is a possibility that we could have $0 or $3.4 million. Now that's very unlikely, but it's on the board, right? So less than 5%. We can say in the middle 50%, the more likely result is that you're going to have either $0 or 1.7 million, right? That's the most kind of likely in that range. And then inside of that, we then get the median, which is saying, look, it's most likely under all the scenarios that you'll have $772,998. That's the most likely amount that you'll have at 70. And then that's how we're able to build that from there. When you're looking at the investments, I do like to always see from a tax diversification perspective just where the money is allocated. And so you can see that I believe this adds up to about like 1.4. I think it was like 1.4 million. And so then we can see that 150,000 close to 10%. We can see that about 70% of their assets is inside of a tax deferred account. And normally when we're taking a look at that, the idea of a tax deferred is I believe I will have lower taxes in the future. That's why I'm deferring them. And that is not a slam dunk for everybody. So it is something that we want to take an honest look at. Do I believe that my income will be lower in the future? If I believe my income will be lower in the future, then sure, deferring taxes to the future is probably going to work out fine for you. If you're not sure, or you believe that your income possibly will be higher in the future because you're taking trips and you're remodeling the home and you're giving to the charities and you're doing all these things, well, if those are increasing your income in retirement, then at a minimum, if nothing happens to the taxes, then you'll just be in a higher bracket. You'll pay more taxes. At a maximum, we're at historically low tax rates now, and you hear people talking about increasing taxes on certain brackets and certain situations. And even the current administration, right? So I believe I had read, and I don't think it ended up going anywhere, but there was debate about adding another tax bracket to help get rid of some of the debt. And so they were talking about adding a bracket for like if you have $1 million or more. I believe the bracket right now, the highest one is like 670,000 or more in a year, but they want to add another bracket. So maybe you'll be taxed at 50%. And then that would be if you have $1 million or more. All I'm simply saying is that it's a possibility taxes could go up. And depending on how you structured your money, having 70% of your money not being taxed yet at historically low taxes is opening us up for risks that maybe we don't need to take, if that makes sense to you. Hopefully that does. So their asset allocation was fine. And so they had about 40%, 45% of the market, and about 56% was a little bit more like in bonds and things. So that was fine considering their age and the amount of money that they had. Yeah. So look, I said 1.4, it was 1.37. So that we're good on that. And then the real estate they had, I believe it was 400 is in the Florida condo, and it was like 325 is in the New York home. It was something like that. And then the mortgage is all that's left. So they had less than 5 years left on the mortgage. And then they had 45K in a savings account, right? So that would be where that money is. All right. So when we're talking about the overall retirement plan, there's a couple things. So first and foremost, when we first started, just based on when the numbers were placed in there and then the risk that we accounted for, there was a 51% chance of probability. You can see that we're going to have an ending value of about 25,000. And then you can see that it's closer to 770,000, closer to $1 million being left over, which would be fine. We did not change the retirement because they're already retired. So we didn't change that. They're already collecting Social Security. So we just took the numbers that they had and we placed those in there. That's the way Social Security starts with at retirement. There's no reason to make any changes on that as well. And then as their retired income is the exact same as what their other expenses were. So we maintain that. And then I will show you the tax plan and how we're able to make the adjustments for them. And so I did want to show you, because I promised you all I would show you the stress test real quick. And the idea of the stress test is just you giving yourself the confidence of knowing that if something goes sideways, that I've at least thought about it and I've considered it in my plan. Does it mean that I am 100% protected from that risk? Well, maybe not, but it at least means that I've considered it. And so we'll normally go through, and then you'll see, and we change the risk variables, and you can see that we looked at everything from the market dropping by 20%, Social Security benefits reducing by 20%, right? Inflation being higher, asset returns lower. These are compounding. That's why 1% is such a huge impact, because it's a compounding impact, right? So it's 1% every single day, right? Because it's on your return. And same with inflation. And then your taxes about 20% higher. And then if we live 5 years longer, then healthcare expenses are 20% higher. And then we look through those different variables, and then we're able to see what causes the biggest decrease for us. So you can see that the asset return is drops it to 50. You can see Social Security is a big one for them because that's a decent amount of the income that they're generating. And then you see the market drop as well. And so then when you're making a plan for yourself, when you consider these things, all you're basically saying is, depending on what happens, do I have a portfolio allocation that considers the possibility of the market dropping 20%, right? And then if I don't, then I'll make the adjustment. Do I have, for Social Security, do I have income streams that are outside of Social Security where less than my income is being funded by Social Security? Because the numbers are showing that Social Security doesn't have the ability to continue paying 100% into the future, and that it will drop somewhere around 70 to 80% of whatever the amounts are. And so that is what's going to happen. Then what am I doing to protect that, right? That's the idea. Now, even though these numbers are low, I'm going to show you kind of why I wasn't concerned about them, and then we can kind of keep moving forward on that. So the reason I wasn't very concerned about that is because in their particular plan, we had left in the long-term care. And so we said the last 2 years of each of their plans, we're saying that the long-term care, and so it's at 75,000 now, and then it would have been increasing by the healthcare inflation, which is like 5 or 6% each year. And so this would have been a pretty large chunk of money when you're talking about being 89 and 90. But we did want to have that as a part of their overall plan just to protect them from the overall risk. And so even with the long-term care in there, we had a 73% probability of success, and that was in the last 2 years for each of them. The healthcare expenses, we maintain that, it's just the national average. And then you can see that they would need a new car. And so we said Gerald's age at 70, because right now they have free and clear cars down in Florida. They don't really drive in New York, but they have free and clear cars here in Florida. And then they would be looking at possibly just buying a new vehicle. And I'll show you what that looks like as far as their spending. They did want to take international trips, so we put that in there. They had grandchildren gifts. They wanted to give their grandchildren $5,000 a year. Family visits, they were going to fund them. So they're going to pay for their plane tickets and different things when they visited them. And so we were able to cover that as well. And then they were talking about doing upgrades to the condo, which we said we'll wait till 68. And so we're going to wait till 68, and then they're going to make upgrades to the condo. So right now they have a pretty simple as far as the plan, but I did want to show you what will happen. Right. So if you just changed it from 2 years to 1 year for the long-term care, so instead of 2 years at the amount, it's just 1 year. Remember, we're at 73% probability of success before. Then you see that goes up to 87%. And one of the things that we really do need to think about is, yeah, it's true that long-term care, that 7 out of 10 people 65 and older have at least one long-term care episode. But there are things that we could do, whether that is going and building a health savings account, and we can start placing money in there for our health insurance, whether that is deciding to make adjustments to our Medicare to help cover some of our overall healthcare expenses, where we do a lot more preventative things, or whether we want to be more active with the eating and the walking and the sleeping and meditation and just being outside in nature. All these things can be done from a preventative standpoint to then decrease the likelihood of us being in the percentage of people that would have long-term care, and where you would have something like that would be draining. The numbers show that 7 out of 10 people, but it also shows on average 3 years. And so it's not 3 years altogether, but it's just maybe 6 months here, 4 months there, 7 months here, and over your retirement, it ends up being 3 years. And so all of those are reasons that we would be considering our health first and foremost, almost over a lot of these different things that I would love. We want to be healthy when we're traveling, we want to be healthy or visiting and doing things, and we finally have all control of our time, that's very important for us. And so that's something that we will think about. And you can see how two things. One is you can see that being healthy, how it leaves you so much more money. But then two is you can see how possibly having long-term care just 1 year is going to significantly impact the success of your overall retirement plan. And so you can see how it increases significantly for them because they don't have to pay for that 1 year of long-term care. Just one, well, they pay for 1 year, but they don't have to pay for two. So from a tax perspective, what we ended up doing for them, and I'll show you real quick. So what we basically said is, all right, if we have 10% of our money in tax-free accounts, let's make adjustments to the way that our investments are allocated. We're already retired. Then a very fancy way of just simply saying we're not contributing any more money to our portfolio. We have $2 million, we got $2 million, well, 1.4 in investments, which means that we ultimately are now going to change the allocation. So inside of my investments, I can invest in tax-free assets, right? Municipal bonds, treasury, different. No, that I was thinking of the wrong one. But you can do like different municipal bonds. Some people will even look at just mutual funds that are like tax-free. There's ETFs that are tax-free where you can look these up, and then we'll make adjustments to the allocations for you. So that way, more of your money is moving into tax-free investments, and then less of your money is staying in tax investments. And then the second thing we would look at is taxable, because we're going to have a year and a day keeping those investments, then they'll be taxed at capital gains, which is a much more favorable tax rate than ordinary income. And then the very last thing that we will look at would be tax deferred, that we don't want to leave the money in there if we don't have to, because RMDs, required minimum distribution, start at 73. And because right now 70% of their income is going to be taxed as ordinary income because it hasn't been taxed yet. And Uncle Sam, when your money hasn't been taxed yet, he's just not the kindest person. And so ideally, we're able to start moving the money into taxable accounts and tax-free accounts. So that way we have more control, more flexibility, and less pressure to take the money out and to worry about being taxed. And so then the withdrawal strategy for them, it actually worked out better where we did taxable first. So we withdrew from the taxable accounts first, which would give them capital gains as the rates. And then we did pro rata. It just means that you then took it evenly from the other two. So pro rata just means like if you needed $50,000 to be taken out, that we would take out the first 30,000 from the taxable account, and then we would split 10,000 from your tax deferred and your tax free account. That's what pro rata means. I take it evenly out, and so then that's what we ended up doing. And the last thing we did is we did some small Roth conversions in those years before 70. So like, well, hey, you just retired, you have some lower income. We're not going to be doing like the new car yet. We're not going to be doing the remodeling of the house yet. But what if any year that we have income less than 10% of a tax bracket, that we just do the Roth conversions? And so it's very small amounts that we're able to do in those years, but it was able to give them more tax-free money, which then means that you have about 100K less in taxes, and that you have about 322,000 more in tax-adjusted ending assets. All right, so we're saying they have more than that, and then they were able to withdraw almost half a million dollars less from their tax-deferred accounts. So they just didn't have to take out the extra money, right? Two things is, one is in your tax-deferred accounts, you have required minimum distributions, or you'd face a 25% penalty. If you take out the amount that's required, which gets larger as we get older, then that's more money that we're taking out that maybe we weren't going to spend. That's just the reality. We just weren't going to spend it, but we took it out because we didn't want Uncle Sam to take it. Well, they're able to leave more money in their accounts for that. Also, you will realize if you were funding your retirement, and let's say it was $100,000, but you had then had a 20% tax, so you would then take out an extra $20,000 to cover the taxes. Now, you would say, well, my tax would be 20%, but you get the idea. The idea is if my money's in a tax-free account, then I take out $100,000 and I spend $100,000. If my money's in a taxed account or a tax-deferred account and it's going to be taxed as ordinary income, that means I have to take out my $100,000 plus the amount that's going to be going towards my taxes, because you will have to pay taxes on the extra amount. And so that ended up giving them a lot more flexibility, a lot more money that was left in their account. And so you can see Just in the very early few years, we were able to do the Roth conversion. Anytime, so you see the blue line, that is what's going to be our 10% tax bracket. So we're saying anytime that we're below 10%, we then took out the Roth conversions. And so you can see that we did it at 66, 67, 68. And then that was when we purchased the new vehicle. So that was the bump that you see there. And then you can see, actually, was that the new vehicle? One of them, I forget which one. I know we did the new vehicle at 1, and then at 70, I know we did the house improvements, or maybe it was flipped around. We did, those are the two events. So those are the two bumps. I believe that the home improvements was 68 and the new vehicle was at 70. Yeah, that's what it was. So you can see that we had the house improvements, and then that was the first bump, and then you can see we got the new vehicle at 70. That was the second bump, and then that required us to take out more income and moved us up into a higher tax bracket, which, that's what happens. And then you can see that we then went back to business as usual. And then because we had that opportunity, we were able to keep ourselves from being in taxed and moved into higher brackets. Where if you would have had to take out that extra 500,000 over the life of your retirement, then that would have reasonably moved you into a higher tax bracket. And so we're able to save them a pretty good amount of money by giving them that flexibility early on into their retirement. All right. And so you can see that ultimately, if you want to, in many ways, if the goal is to have two homes, then you really need to take a look at a couple things. One is we're definitely focusing a little bit more on taxes because you don't want to pay too much in taxes because you have two different residents. Naturally, ideally, you would lean towards the resident that doesn't have a state tax if that's the state that you're in, right? So if you could choose between Florida and New York, ideally, you'd probably want to have the one that doesn't have the state tax as your resident. But with that said, I do have clients that prefer to have New York as their residency, even though they pay more in taxes, because the way that they described it to me is that they just felt like people fall into the cracks a little bit more in Florida, that the system isn't designed to help people as much in New York. Right. So if you look at anything from our like unemployment, how much the income that they give with that, how much they pay their teachers, if you look across the board, you see that Florida, while we don't have the tax, it also causes the state to not be able to spend as much as some other states. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing, that's really not, what we're talking about here. But the idea is that there are some people who would say, I would rather be in the New York system so that I can have the extra healthcare, so I can have the extra assistance, because I'm going to need that in my retirement, which is totally a fine plan, and it works for you, then it works for you. And so you want to be looking and thinking about these. Normally, you got to look up to see how often I need to be there to make sure I'm above or below that number. In New York, it's 183 days a year, about 10 months. And so if you're there less than that, and then you're able to prove that you have a normal life in your other state, so you have a mortgage or you have your rental contract, you have your doctors in the other state, and then you can prove the date. So you need to keep a pretty good log of your traveling. Otherwise, New York's going to say that you're trying to take from them, and they're going to tax and take it from you. And so that's why when you're talking about living in multiple states, why it becomes super important that you keep track of all that data, and then you'll keep track of it. And obviously, we would help you to be able to do that as well. And then you can spend the time in both of the places, and it'll be absolutely fantastic for you. And so you can see that ultimately, when we're able to put the plan together, it worked very well for them. And the last thing I will show you is we talk about like Medicare. So we're talking about Medicare. There's a couple things. So one is if you're in two states, then you normally that's going to change the choices of the Medicare that you're going to end up choosing. And so what we're basically saying is, for example, Medicare Part C, which is also called Medicare Advantage, that's the one where you have the dental and the vision. For some people are like, yeah, I had that when I was working. I would like that in my retirement, which is right, totally fine. The difficulty that we run into is if we're traveling a decent amount of time, then we have to make sure that our doctor is in network. So we just have to be more intentional that I see my doctor whenever I'm back home, because if not, then you're paying out of network fees, and those can really eat up into your retirement. Right? Medicare is able to, as a whole, be like, hey, look, doctors, these are some of the limits of what you can charge. And then, you can be in the network and we'll work with you, right? Just like your own PPO and different things like that. If you're traveling a lot and you're always out of network, then those doctors can charge you whatever they want out of network. And so then you would choose the Medigap plans when you're someone who travels a lot. because if you're out of network, then the Medicaps will give you caps on your deductibles, your co-insurance, and different things like that, to where it gives you a little bit of protection. You won't have the dental and you won't have the dental and the vision, but those are sort of the trade-offs that you end up making. As always, you want to keep in mind of when you start. So with normally Medicare, you get that 65th, and then you get the 3 months before and the 3 months after. And so you normally want to make sure you're enrolling in that year of your 65th. And so we normally will let people know a handful of things, right? So you're not automatically enrolled, so you got to enroll. It says if you have a group, retirement benefit, or COBRA, right, you need more Medicare. Then if you miss your enrollment period, you have a lifetime penalty. The lifetime penalty is a very fancy way of saying that your premium's just higher. So if it would have been $50 a month and you missed the window, so it was $60 a month, then that's what you have to pay the rest of your retirement life, and it adds up. If you are so late that it's maybe $100 a month or something like that, then same idea. You'll pay $100 a month the rest of your retirement life. And so that's why normally we would keep an eye on that for you. And then the overall plan normally ranges somewhere between $5,000 to $8,000. And then you saw with the plan, we put them at, I believe it was like 6,500 or something like that. I believe it was like 6,500. Right. And so then normally you'll take a look at all those, and then you'll decide what makes the most sense for you between Medicare Part A and B. And then D would be the prescription drugs. And then just depending on if you're traveling or not, that's normally how we would talk about that. So normally you would choose between your location. Are you going to be traveling a lot or a little? Your health considerations. Do you consider yourself relatively healthy, or do you think you'll be going to the doctor a lot? Because if you're going to go to the doctor a lot, then you would care about your deductible and your copay. If you don't think you're going to go to the doctor that much, then you don't really care about the deductible and copay, because you're not going to pay it that often. And then the risk consideration is just like, hey, look, do you want to make sure everything is covered where you have a set amount? You may have to make a monthly payment, but you don't have to worry as much about the unexpected, right? And so if that's something that you lean towards, then we would also be like, all right, well, then we'll look at the Medicare plans that have the caps on everything. Cost a little bit more per month, but at least you don't have the risk of being like, well, I just don't want the risk. Everybody's a little different. And so normally we'll go through that information, and then we decide what makes the most sense for everyone. The healthcare is easily probably one of the bigger decisions as far as retirement success, but it's one of the ones that we just don't really look at or think about very often. All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as always, it is absolutely great to spend the time with you. And I'm hoping that you all are enjoying the rest of your summer. I know my kids are. I'm Dre Griggs, founder of City and Wisdom. And if you are interested, you can always come and join us at our next, and I will show it to you. You can always come and join us at our next. Just go to obsidianwisdom.com/risk. And every single Wednesday, we do a live workshop where we go over the 5 hidden dangers to retirement success that cost people thousands of dollars. And I'll give you 3 simple frameworks that I use with my clients as far as how to fix them. You would just come here, fill it out, sign up, and then I will see you inside. Until next time, I'm always thankful, and stay safe and enjoy life.